So, welcome everyone to this special session called A Year in Hebrew Words. And I really want to express my gratitude, first of all, that you are joining me tonight. The point of this session, A Year in Hebrew Words, is to give you a little bit of a take on what it's like to live in Israel over this past year, what we're going through right now, because it's still not over. Those of you who are subscribed to my podcast and come regularly, or who are on my newsletter, Hebrew is Magic, you know that I really love Hebrew in general. I feel like Hebrew is a wonderful gateway into human psychology. I feel like Hebrew actually knows human nature maybe better than we know ourselves. And so I thought that this was the best way to introduce you to some of the deepest feelings that we in Israel have been experiencing over the past year, and also offer a little bit of wisdom into what might lie ahead, also into what makes Israel special and great and wonderful, which I truly believe it is. Before we dive into the presentation, I do want to give at least a minute or two of an overview of what today has been like for those of us who are in Israel right now. There are really typically two very sad days on the Israeli calendar. Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and Yom HaZikaron, which is Memorial Day. Typically, Memorial Day has been Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers. In recent years, it's been added victims of terror as well. So those 2 days have always been the heaviest on the Jewish calendar, and we mark them with a siren at 10 o'clock in the morning, and another the night before. There are ceremonies throughout towns. Every town has a ceremony. It's a very heavy day. All the music on the radio is sad and downbeat music. Same with television programming. Israel is a country that does know how to mourn and how to pay its respect to to those who have fallen and also to those who are experiencing loss. If you've never been in Israel on Memorial Day or Yom HaShoah, it's a very meaningful time to be here. And I would schedule your next trip if you can for it's usually late April or early May when those days fall. The thing about those days, though, that's a little different is once that day is over, that day is over. When Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, is done, we go right back to our normal lives the next day. And it's even more extreme with Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day. Those of you who know Israel, you know that when Memorial Day ends, we go straight into Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzmaut, from the deepest wells of mourning to the utmost joy as we go into the happiest day on the Israeli calendar. It's a really stark differentiation. So here's what's different about today, the 1 year anniversary of October 7th, is that as heavy as this day has been today for all of us, tomorrow, October 8th, 2024, we're still living in it. It's still going on. It's not over. We don't just go back to our normal lives. We certainly don't go to a joyous day like Independence Day. The nightmare continues. And when I say nightmare, it's a varying degree of nightmare. Thank God I'm at the very extreme end. I don't feel it nearly as personally as others do. Look, our lives are still very much disrupted. Today, just a couple hours ago, I was in the bomb shelter yet again. I don't know if you heard, but Yemen, the Houthis launched a ballistic missile toward Tel Aviv and it was shot down. But the sirens went off in the center of Israel. I was at the park with my kid playing frisbee, and we had to run to an apartment building, and someone let us in, and we went down to the bomb shelter in this building. That's not a normal life. And it's going to be like that tomorrow as well. And tomorrow, we're still going to have soldiers in Lebanon. We're still going to have soldiers in Gaza. And worst of all, we're still going to have over 100 hostages in Gaza who are still there. So in Judaism, one of the most important questions is always Ma nishtana? How is this different? And October 7th, 2024 is different because once tomorrow comes, it's still continuing on. We won't be able to have left it. In terms of what people are doing today, a lot of ceremonies. There are official government ceremonies. There are protest ceremonies against the government ceremonies. There are visits to the Nova site in the south, people going south to Kibbutz Be'eri and other settlements in the south. Just a lot of gatherings in living rooms and remembering. And uh, it felt in Hebrew we say avirah, the environment, the atmosphere. It felt different today. It felt like there was less honking on the streets. It felt like it was sort of a subdued mood throughout the country. It could just be my wishful thinking or my imagination, but it really did feel like there was something different in the air today. I think the one thing you hear every Israeli saying is "Ani lo ma'amin" or "Ani lo ma'amina." I can't believe it. We just can't believe that it was a year ago. On the one hand, it seems to have flown by like already 1 year, and on the other hand, it's very hard for us to remember what life was like before October 7th. It's a different reality. It was certainly a different Israel, but really a different reality for all of us. So today is a marker in so many ways, and a very sad day here. And I'm curious what tomorrow will be like, what the transition out of it will be. So in terms of the presentation itself, what I thought I would do was, I every week in my newsletter, Hebrew is Magic, I take a Hebrew word and I dissect it. And I talk about the life lessons that we can learn from looking at this Hebrew word. And so what I did for tonight is I chose 5 Hebrew words that I think are worth examining a little bit because they shed light on the Israeli experience over the past year. And so we're going to do a little bit of a screen share here. Give me 1 minute while I set it up. Okay. So hopefully this all looks pretty good to you. Um, what we're seeing right here is a year in Hebrew words. And we'll go to our first word. Our first word is really one of my favorite words from this year. It's the word chiyuni or chiyunit. It's an adjective. And if you see this little, I don't know if you see my arrow, but if you see that little dot between the yud and the taf, that's really the new Hebrew style for indicating the male and female versions of an adjective. Chiyuni is the male version and chiyunit is the female. So I'll tell you the little backstory behind this word. Last November, November of 2023, I was already in North America doing a book tour for Israel 201, and I was talking about Israel and answering a lot of questions about what Israelis were going through to audiences in North America. And everyone in here in Israel obviously was extremely depressed about what was going on. And my wife Dorit is a Sabra Israeli. She was born and raised here. And like so many Israelis who grew up here, it was just a harrowing time. And she was extremely down. It was a makkah. It was a real blow to all of them to see what had happened to their country. But then there was this one day in November when I called home, and for the first time, Dorit sounded a little different. She sounded a little bit upbeat. There was a little bit of pep in her voice. And I said, Dorit, you sound a little bit happy for the first time. What's changed? And she said, well, some friends of mine were able to connect me to a unit of Givati infantry soldiers who are going into Gaza in a few days, and we're baking for them, and we're raising money to buy them new mattresses and new socks and powder for their feet and some other toiletries, and we're sending meals down. And I just feel so chiyunit. And I never heard that word before. And I said, Dorit, what's that word, chiyunit? And she said, oh, it means to feel needed by other human beings, to feel essential. And I thought, wow, how great is it that Hebrew actually has a word for that? Chiyuni is the male version, or chiyunit, the feminine version. And so I looked into it. I wanted to research the word. What is the root? Because every verb and a lot of adjectives in Hebrew, they actually are based on a root, a shoresh. So I wondered, what is the root of this word chiyuni? And it turns out the root of chiyuni is chai. Do you see it circled right there? Give me a thumbs up if you see it circled on your screen. Good. So chai, which means life. And I feel there's such a beautiful message here that, we're all searching for the purpose of life. And it seems that Hebrew knows that the purpose is to feel needed by other human beings, to feel essential. And this word chiyunit, I really think exemplifies what this past year has been like for so many Israelis. Because on the one hand, October 7th was obviously a very important day in Israel's history, but so was October 8th and every day after. Because beginning on October 8th, the country really came together. Israelis left all the strife and chaos that was happening before October 7th with judicial reform and government upheaval, and instead Israelis unified and began supporting each other and being needed to each other and becoming essential to each other in ways that is keeping the country going today. So my favorite word for the past year is without question chiyunit, because I think it exemplifies the best, not only the best of what Israelis are, but the best of what Israeliness is. You know, Israelis can be rough around the edges when you first meet them. They can be brash in your face, chutzpah, but there's a generosity to the soul of the Israeli. They will do anything for you. In chiyunit, that represents who Israelis are at their best. And in many ways, this past year has brought out the best in Israelis. So that's our first word. Our second word is miflaga. Miflaga means political party. So, Eze Miflaga, here you would say Likud, Labor, Meretz, United Torah Judaism. In the United States, it would be Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Miflaga, political party. And you hear that word party, you think of a bunch of people coming together, and that really, I don't think that really can communicate what Miflaga really is. What is a political party? Well, if you really want to know what a political party is, we need to look at the Hebrew. And miflaga is derived from the same root as the verb lehaflig. And the word lehaflig is Hebrew for to divide. And I think there's a lot of wisdom here. Hebrew is telling us that the true purpose of political parties is to divide us. It's to separate us from each other and to point out our divisions. Because let's face it, no politician can stay in power unless they differentiate themselves from other politicians and other political parties. And I think the word miflaga, which means political party, in a way, it's a warning. It's a warning to us. That warning is be wary of government and politicians who might be trying to divide you. You need to stay unified as a people, regardless of what the government might be trying to do. And this is very relevant in Israel right now because this past almost 2 years, since January of 2023, have been 2 years of incredible political upheaval. I'm not going to get political and say whether I'm pro Netanyahu, against Netanyahu. I think there's been good and bad in a lot of what all politicians have been doing over these past 2 years. There's no one politician who stands out to me as an exemplar of values or is perfect. They've all done even the most extremists like Ben Gvir. I've in my podcast once in a while I've said I actually agree with him doing this. It's rare, but once in a while. Uh, but all politicians, I've also had negative things to say about them. But the point here is that over the past almost 2 years, the politicians in Israel really have been dividing the people. And I've talked to many experts, many smart people, professors, sociologists who said that before October 7th, we were extremely close to civil war because of all the division in Israel created by our politicians. And some have even told me, off the record, don't use my name saying this, but they've told me that October 7th, in a way, saved the country. Because if it hadn't been for October 7th, we would have fallen into civil war. And instead, October 7th unified us and reminded so many of us of what our mission is as a Jewish democratic country. So I thought it was important to point out this word, miflaga, and how it's related to the idea of dividing, because it's so easy to forget that If we're not careful, we can become divided. But when the people stay unified, a country stays strong. And the only reason Israel is strong right now is because of the people. Okay. Next word. Milchama. Milchama means war. And when we hear war, the word war, we all have a visceral reaction to what war is, to what we feel about war. But what is war? Like, have you ever really asked yourselves, what is war? Why do wars happen? Hebrew actually seems to offer an answer. And for that, we have to look at the root of the word war, the shoresh. The root of the word war is right there in the middle of the word milchama, lechem, which means bread. And I think there are two ways to interpret this. On a very literal level, Hebrew is telling us that all war is about bread, about natural resources, about the fight for the most basic things: land, food, water, wheat, barley, the ingredients of bread, that at the end of the day, all war is just about bread. And I think that was probably true a few hundred years ago, even. I think in today's world, certainly in the wars that Israel is fighting right now, it's more metaphorical. I think we need to see lechem, the bread, as wars being about the core values, the bread of any society. And right now, the mistake the world is making is they believe that the war that Israel has with Hamas, with Hezbollah, they believe it's a war about bread, literal bread. They believe it's a war about borders, about land, about parts of the West Bank, about the Golan Heights, about Gaza. It's not. It's about the core values of two clashing societies. On the one hand, we have a country, Israel, who is striving to be both Jewish and democratic. And then we have these other societies who are fueled by a hatred for Israel and a hatred for Jews. That is their lechem. That is their bread. There are, I believe, over 40, maybe over 50 majority Muslim countries in the world. There are close to 2 billion Muslims on earth. There's one Jewish country, one country with a majority Jewish population. There are 15 million Jews in the world. This is not about literal bread. It is not about land or borders or water rights. It is about the lechem, the bread that is at the heart of the values of these societies that absolutely hate us and want to destroy us. And I think Hebrew is telling us, if you want to know what any conflict is about, go to the lechem, see what is at the core of what each of the warring parties stands for. I think if the rest of the world did that, they would have no choice but to be on Israel's side. But instead, they've been duped into falling for the narratives that have been playing out in the media and social media, especially in the imagery that show Israel as the aggressor and the other side as the poor oppressed. We need to look at the lechem. Milchama ultimately comes down to the bread, whether it's literal or the metaphorical. And in this case, to me at least, as someone who lives in Israel, the difference could not be more stark or more clear. So that's the third word I wanted to share with you. The fourth is korban. Korban is a word from the Torah. It means sacrifice. And when you hear the word sacrifice, go ahead. What are the first images and words that come to mind when you hear the word sacrifice? I know what I think about. What am I giving up? What am I losing? what's being taken from me. When we think of sacrifice, we usually think in negative terms. What is, we're getting the what's it called? The fuzzy end of the lollipop here by making this sacrifice. We're losing out on something. But Hebrew actually has another take on sacrifice, and it's really beautiful. And to understand Hebrew's take on sacrifice, we need to look at the shoresh, the root of the word sacrifice. The root of the word sacrifice is kuf resh beit, karov, which means to get close to. Hebrew is telling us that the reason we make sacrifices is to get close to the things that we value most, whether it's the people we hold dear or the ideas that we treasure. That is why we make sacrifices. Hebrew is telling us that sacrifices, it's not about losing and what you give up and what's being taken from you. It's about what you want to get closer to. Kuf resh beit karov. And we have been seeing that over and over in Israel in the past year. People have been making sacrifices on every level imaginable. At the one extreme, you have the soldiers. I believe it's over 750 soldiers who have been killed since October 7th in Gaza, in Lebanon, yesterday in Israel, in Be'er Sheva at the bus station, a soldier. So that's not including October 7th itself. These are soldiers who, when October 7th happened, didn't even wait for orders to be called up. They found their uniform. They got in their cars, their motorcycles, drove south, trying to protect the kibbutzim, the moshavim in the south, and so many of them sacrificing their lives on behalf of the country. We have more than 2,000 soldiers who've been designated permanently injured for the rest of their lives. That means blind, deaf, some soldiers who've been blinded and deaf now for the rest of their lives, loss of limbs, including multiple amputees, and so many other injuries that they will not recover from. These are the sacrifices. And they did it because there was a value that they cared for more than their own personal safety. And that's what Korban is all about. It's not about being a victim or someone who loses out on something. It's someone who dedicates a piece of their life or their whole life to an idea that they care for because they want to get closer to it. So Korban is another one of those words that I think wonderfully exemplifies the best of what Israel has been and who Israelis have been over the past year. The final word I want to share with you is nitzachon, a very important word. Nitzachon means victory. And the question is, when will Israel be victorious? How will we know when we've reached victory? Well, already Hamas has been downgraded from a military to a guerrilla operatives, that they're not functioning as a military, they're merely guerrillas at this point. Hezbollah, we've taken out Nasrallah. We took out Nasrallah's second in command. We've killed over 400 Hezbollah fighters in the past week. When will that be victorious? How will we know when we've reached victory? It's sort of impossible to know what victory looks like, but Hebrew can offer us a clue. And to offer us a clue of what real victory looks like, we look again at the root of the word, and it's nun tzadik chet, which is a Hebrew word, netzach. And netzach means forever. I think Hebrew is telling us that there really is no such a thing as victory that only lasts for a little while. Victory means forever, permanent. When the residents of the North can move back to their homes and live there permanently, that is when we will have been victorious. When Israel is no longer threatened by Hamas or any other terrorist organization from the Gaza Strip, ever, that is when victory will be upon us. And when all the hostages and the bodies of the deceased hostages have been returned to Israel forever, that is when we will have victory. On the one hand, it's a beautiful idea, but on the other hand, it's somewhat pessimistic because it means we're a long way. We're a long way from that kind of victory. But I like that Hebrew doesn't sugarcoat it. I like that Hebrew isn't saying, the root of the word victory could be degel, which means when you plant the flag, that means you're victorious. But Hebrew doesn't say that. Hebrew is saying you're victorious when the results of your victory are permanent and lasting lenetzach, forever. And that's why I think it's the perfect word to conclude with, because we are asking ourselves here in Israel every day, where is this headed? How will we know when the war has been won? The answer is given to us by Hebrew. It's when we can have an Israel that is no longer threatened and our hostages have come home. So those are the 5 words I wanted to share with you today. Before I end the session, I do want to open up the room to any questions you have, either about the words themselves, another word you want to ask about, or just in general what things are like in Israel right now. The best way to do that is to put your question in the chat, but you can also, wow, there's so many of you here, which is great. I don't know if I would see it. I would see you if you raise your hand. So I think the best way, go ahead and type in the chat if you have a question. And meanwhile, I'm going to put something in the chat. I'm putting the link to the Inside Israel podcast and the Hebrew is Magic newsletter. So if you're not already signed up for the Hebrew is Magic newsletter, you can do that at joelchasnoff.com in the footer or at joelchasnoff.com/podcast. And if you want to subscribe to my weekly podcast, Inside Israel, I always do the podcast on Sunday evenings. I record it live here on Zoom, and then I upload it to Apple and Spotify. The links to listen to the podcast and to subscribe are on my website, joelchasnoff.com/podcast. So someone asked about the word ideology. The only word I know for ideology is ideologia, which is sort of the Hebrew version of the English. There must be another word for ideology. I would have to look that up and see what it is. Are there any other new words that came up since October 7th, like chiyuni? Chiyuni is not a new word, but it's just a word that was really rarely used. But suddenly, since October 7th, it became a part of the conversation again. Because it really exemplified everything that was happening in the country. Let's see, are there other words that have been used a lot? Wow, I guess now that I'm on the spot, I'm not able to think of any, but in my next newsletter, I'll share a few if they have come up. Here's one that that we are hearing a lot, Rena. It's a good question. Aslama. Haslama, it's clever because it means 2 things. A ladder in Hebrew is a sulam. Sulam is a ladder. So when they talk about haslama, what they're talking about is escalation, almost like literally a ladderization. So when they talk about an escalation in fighting or an escalation in tensions, they're talking about haslama. But a very close word is aslama, which means Islamicization, like an area of Lebanon is becoming more Islamic, or Europe is becoming more Islamicized. That's aslama. So it's ironic to me that haslama, escalation, is very close to aslama, which means becoming more Islamic. Here's a long question. If the world considers bombing a war crime and considers targeted assassinations a war crime, what do they mean when they say that Israel is allowed to defend itself? I'll tell you this. According to the rules of war, and I do sessions on, it's called Torah and Neshek, which is purity of arms, which is Israel's code of ethics. According to the rules of war, you are allowed to bomb a hospital, you are allowed to bomb a school, and you are allowed to bomb an ambulance if Your enemy is using those places as a location from which to either attack you or put together plans to attack you. Now, generally, the world does not know this. They don't know that these are part of the Geneva Convention's rules of war. They assume that if you bomb a school, it's wrong. If you bomb a hospital, it's wrong. But actually, what's wrong is what Hamas and Hezbollah have been doing. They've been building their centers of operation in schools, in hospitals, in other areas that they know Israel will be accused of breaking the humanitarian law if they bomb them. But according to the rules of war, Israel is actually, any country is allowed to bomb those places, attack those places if the enemy is using them as a base of their operations. Can you imagine if Israel operated out of hospitals or schools? The world would go nuts. They would accuse us of hiding behind our civilians, and yet that's exactly what Israel's enemies do. But just to be clear, according to the rules of war, you are allowed to attack those locations if your enemy is using them. Someone mentioned their home front command app went off today at 10:45 a.m. Eastern. Yes, that's my 5:45 p.m. And that's exactly what I spoke about at the very beginning of the session, that I was at the park at around 5:45 p.m. That's actually exactly when it went off. And the Houthis in Yemen launched a ballistic missile at the center of Israel. It was shot down, so no damage done as far as I know. But that is why your app went off. For those of you who really want to know what Israelis are going through, I'm going to put it here. Just go to the App Store, Home Front Command, and put it in the chat. You can download that app, and it goes off anytime there's a missile attack. It actually makes a little siren sound on your phone and tells you how long you have to get to the shelter. Today, it told me I had a minute and a half to get to the nearest bomb shelter. So my kid and I ran to an apartment building nearby where all the people who were in the park ran. And obviously the people in the apartment opened the door and let us in. And we hid in the basement bomb shelter for 10 minutes. That's what you're supposed to do. So Hank asked about the word eliminated. Yes. In Hebrew, when we talk about taking out Nasrallah, we don't use the word assassinated. We use the word chisul, which means eliminated. I'm not sure why. I can't really think of the word, what the Hebrew word for assassinated is. There probably is one, but I think it is interesting to me that we don't use the word assassination, because assassination sort of has I think it has a connotation about it of political motives, that we assassinate someone in order to advance ourselves politically, whereas chisul is eliminating a threat. So that's true, Hank. And I talked about that in one of my newsletters probably a couple months ago, that we don't use the word for assassination. We use chisul, which means eliminated, when talking about world leaders. The US and Britain have done all of what they accuse Israel of doing and then some. Yes, I agree 100% with that. If you could, I would love to do a thought experiment with Americans and say, all right, if you don't like what Israel is doing, let's go back to Hiroshima. If you could do it all over again, would you not drop the bomb on Hiroshima? And just realize, if we didn't drop the bomb, you wouldn't have the home you're living in today, on the land you're living in today. You wouldn't have the life you're living here today. You might not even be here today. Would you go back in time and not drop that bomb on Hiroshima? I wonder how many would say that they would not drop the bomb and give up whatever they have right now. Same with living on the land they are now. I do shows all over the US, and I do college shows as well, in addition to my shows in the Jewish world. And whenever I go and do a show at a college campus, I'm not talking about Hillel, I'm talking about for the general college campus. They almost always come out ahead of time before the show, and they say, we want to just acknowledge that we are on land right now that used to belong to this or that Native American tribe. And then they go on with the event. But they're acknowledging it. And I wonder how many of them would actually give up the land that their beautiful home or school is on out of fairness to whichever displaced people they're announcing about. Obviously, none of them are doing that. None of them would. So yes, there's a lot of hypocrisy out there, but I think because it's Israel, that's why it happens. I wish I had a better a better answer than that. Uh, So someone mentioned on campus, they always mention living. Yes, okay. So looking at any final comments here. All right. I'm going to conclude this right now by thanking you once again for coming out to this session. Again, it's called A Year in Hebrew Words. If you know someone else who would enjoy it, I'm going to post it on my YouTube page tomorrow. Just go to joelchasnoff.com and slash podcast, and a link will be there. It'll direct you exactly to where that video is on my YouTube page. I'll put it in my newsletter as well. That's the best way to get that video. So if you want to share this with someone else who wasn't able to make it, or just watch it again with the Hebrew words, sign up for the newsletter. And on Thursdays, that goes out, Hebrews Magic, and I will have the link in there. Otherwise, I hope to see all of you again. If you're a regular podcast listener on Sunday nights, welcome back. Thanks for joining me 2 nights in a row. If you're new to the Joel Chasnoff scene and to Hebrew is Magic, welcome, and I hope to see you down the road so we can share more knowledge and wisdom from Hebrew together. Shana Tova to everyone. Tzom Kal, which means may you have an easy fast. I'm leaving for the US Saturday night, right after Yom Kippur. I'm headed straight to the airport, going on my US tour. So I guess that's the final thing I would announce is that if you want to meet up on the road, you can go ahead and check out joelchasnoff.com/shows, and you can see my tour schedule. Hopefully, I'll see you somewhere in the US over the next few months. Lahitraot, everyone. Thank you for joining. Have a meaningful October 7th as you continue to commemorate this very difficult day for all of us. It was wonderful for me to spend some time with you. Bye bye.